Hey everyone, so this video is just going to be going over the nitrogen cycle, talking about that as one of our geochemical cycles that we're going to be looking at here for ecology. So a couple of things about nitrogen in general and talking about the nitrogen cycle. So part of the reason why nitrogen is important, it's needed by all living organisms to create amino acids and nucleic acids. So if you take nucleic acids in the first two letters of each part, Na, and you start thinking about a molecular compound that's important that has Na as part of it, you might be thinking DNA, and that would be on the right track. So nitrogen is important because it helps us to form DNA. So it's essential for all life on Earth because, as we learned about with living things, DNA is what helps organisms to go through a lot of their bodily processes. Nitrogen in its gaseous form, N2 or dinitrogen, composes about 78% of the Earth's atmosphere, so the majority of Earth's atmosphere. But organisms can't utilize it in that form. If I inhale nitrogen from the atmosphere, I can't use it to help me form DNA. The nitrogen cycle helps convert atmospheric nitrogen, so the gas that we have in the air, into nitrogen compounds, which we can absorb. So I'll go through each of the steps on it, kind of like we have before with previous cycles. So the first thing to look at, nitrogen compounds from the atmosphere, decomposing organic matter, and animal wastes make their way into the ground and water. So it can travel in a couple of different pathways. So here we've got the atmosphere, here we've got a decomposer breaking down some animal matter and some fecal material. All of these contribute to nitrogen that's present in the environment. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria living in the soil, plant roots, and water take nitrogen compounds and convert them into fixed nitrogen compounds. And I don't need you to worry too much about what we mean by fixed nitrogen. It's basically just another state of nitrogen to make sure that this cycle goes through. But do keep in mind that bacteria that we have here in the center, bacteria are key to this cycle happening on a lot of different fronts. Without bacteria, there's no nitrogen cycle. So just remember, nitrogen interacts with nitrogen fixing bacteria in one of these environments and creates fixed nitrogen. That fixed nitrogen is taken in by plants and bacteria, animals that eat the plants and bacteria, or animals that eat the animals that eat the plants and bacteria. So again, we're just talking about kind of like when we talked about the carbon cycle and how glucose moves through everything. It's going to move its way up the food chain. So again, from plants and small bacteria to animals and other animals that eat those animals. So that's how that moves through. Nitrogen compounds in the soil and water are also processed by denitrifying bacteria and go back into the atmosphere as gaseous nitrogen compounds. So again, we've got our nitrogen that's been in one of our two pathways here, either soil or water. This is a different type of bacteria, even though I use the same symbol for it. So just like there are fixing bacteria, this is denitrifying bacteria. This is what's helping us to get nitrogen that goes back into the atmosphere. So again, in order for that to go into a full cycle, some of it does have to go back into the atmosphere. So just as a recap for all of those steps, nitrogen components from the atmosphere, decomposing organic material, and animal waste make their way into the ground and water. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria living in the soil, plant roots, and water take nitrogen compounds and convert them into fixed nitrogen compounds. The fixed nitrogen is taken in by plants and bacteria, then by animals that eat the plants and bacteria, or animals that eat the animals that eat the plants and bacteria. Nitrogen compounds in the soil and water are also processed by denitrifying bacteria and go back into the atmosphere as gaseous nitrogen compounds. So again, I will post this presentation in Classroom. This graphic here is just another representation of the nitrogen cycle. This one's a little bit more complex in terms of breaking down the different types of bacteria and the different compounds that nitrogen is processed in the soil. Again, you don't need to know all of those pieces, but this helps again to kind of show with the processing. Again, we have nitrogen here in the atmosphere, and then a lot of it cycling here through the soil. Again, all of these little structures that kind of look like beans are supposed to be, different types of bacteria. So as we see them move through that, that's mainly what we're looking at here in this cycle. Again, bacteria are very key to the nitrogen cycle. That's why they pop up so much. Again, if you want to hear someone else going over this type of cycle, if it's helpful for you to look at another video, hear someone else explain it, There will be a link here to this video, which is a Fuse School video on the nitrogen cycle. Might help explain it a little bit better than I did. So the last thing I want you to consider, let me move my video down here real quick, is part of the human impact with the nitrogen cycle. So we've got a few different images here that represent part of the human impact. So this one up here on the top right might be kind of obvious, especially if you've taken horticulture with me before. So this is a way in which we add more nitrogen to the environment than would normally be present in the environment. So I put a bag of fertilizer here next to a field that clearly is having an issue with heavy water in that area. So again, fertilizer, NPK, there's a ratio on the front of a lot of these different fertilizer bags, and the N is the first number on here, and that N stands for nitrogen. So nitrogen is commonly a component of a lot of different fertilizers. It's very important for farming and fertilization. So again, when fields are fertilized, they tend to have more nitrogen present in them than would normally be present in the environment. Now, the thing I want you to consider, if it's overrun with water like this, what's the end result that could happen? Think about that for a second. So part of what can happen is that the water will pick up those nitrogen compounds and carry them away someplace else. Water can take up molecules like that and transfer them from one area to another. So it can travel from the farmland to any place that's downhill from it. It can enter the water table, and then suddenly there's more nitrogen in other parts of the environment than there normally would be. Another thing that contributes a little bit more nitrogen than what our environment is normally used to, I have a cow here in the center, and obviously it looks like it's getting ready to go to the bathroom. So when livestock produce waste, again, waste has nitrogen present in it, and because we are growing lots and lots of livestock to feed lots and lots of people, there is more nitrogen in the environment from that waste than there normally would be as well. So that's another way that human impact through the livestock that we raise has raised the amount of nitrogen. And then finally, we have a couple of factory smokestacks here at the very end. This is to represent our human contribution to atmospheric nitrogen. Again, we know that nitrogen is present in the atmosphere. The atmosphere is mostly nitrogen. But even then, we're adding a little bit more than would normally be present because it is a byproduct of certain industrial processes that happen. So we add a little bit more nitrogen to the environment that way as well. So what I want you to consider, let me move my video back up here. Why would studying the nitrogen cycle be important for ecologists? Think about the different impacts that it had. We talked about why it's essential for living things. Again, it's something that we need to help us form DNA. And it's also something that we have added more of in the environment than the environment can normally cycle through. So consider those points as far as why ecologists would be worried about studying the nitrogen cycle. So thank you for looking through this presentation. I hope you found it helpful.